Welcome to the 5th episode of this video essay. Before I start, I will have some words, some commentaries regarding the previous episode, in which I talked about Soviet Communism and the pseudo-science behind it. Now, looking at the video, it feels like I was describing almost like a fever dream of reason on steroids, a monsterly expression of reason dreaming. In this episode, we'll try to tackle the task of understanding another dark period in the previous century. And that is to ask what defines the pseudoscience behind political movement of fascism. My first aid in this task is a video that a philosopher called Stanley has done about fascism. And if you want to watch it yourself, I put a link to that YouTube video in the description box. I have this feeling that he's done that video in order to inform just ordinary people, so that they can see in their daily lives what signature markers or salient features of fascism are. I will go through these salient markers of fascism described by Stanley, but only to use them as springboard for my own take on fascism. This video has its own merits, but when in the next part of this episode, I will have my own take on the essence of fascism, and his description is useful in that take to a certain degree. I emphasize the same fact that Stanley emphasized in the video. The following list of traits of fascism is something you can easily pick up one or two in a normal political discourse. It is only when there are all or most of them present that you for sure are dealing with fascism. And so, without further ado, let's crack on. The first trait of fascism, according to Stanley, is what he calls the mythical past. This is to see some point in nations' past as the ideal, a reminder of better times. See it as a reminder of better times. And this in stark contrast to uncertainties and openness of the present day challenges. This in itself does not make fascism. For example, contemporary conservative political movements promote traditional customs, norms, values and mores. I would say a telling sign that this could be more than just an average conservative stance is the fervor or passion and anger in which the loss of these traditional things is expressed. The second one he mentions is passionate propaganda. Once again, propaganda is everywhere. It is in every political movement. There are things that could be labeled that, oh, this is propaganda, that is propaganda. But it has specific fascist flavor in it when there is this vitriolic sense in it. And when I say vitriolic, I mean in terms of how it looks at the other, how the other, something that is outside the nation, it is seen and described as in dehumanizing terms: vermin, animals, criminals. The third trait is what he calls anti-scientific, anti-intellectual, anti-expert sentiment. These groups of people and their work, they are systematically being devalued. For me, this seems to be somehow relating in fascism to the urge of discarding complexity and discarding, appreciating multiple views. When you, as a scientist, intellectual or expert, study a certain field of knowledge, that tends to train you to look at your study area from different points of view. Experts have more nuanced insight to their objects and study. And this kind of attitude of having a nuanced insight to their objects of studies does not sit well with certain sentiments inside fascism. Because what describes fascist attitude on a great deal of things is that there is this infantile, very black and white, good guys and bad guys, sentiments that have been percolated, recycled over and over in this form of thinking, or form of pseudo-science. The fourth trait Stanley calls unreality, and this really relates to process of creating basic soil for attitudes of anything goes. Any opinion, no matter how uninformed, illogical, unverified, delusional, opinions mixing causality and logical relationships and relationships of correlation to one another, anything goes. Like I said, anything goes. All these opinions are seen in par with well-articulated, well-justified, well-reasoned, well-researched propositions. Stanley uses the term of erosion of tradition of speaking truth to the power. And for me, this is a thing that is usually present in the society way before fascism starts to take the central stage. There are forces in society that are already there way before fascism is there. And, you know, what could I say about these forces? It could be something like fake news channels. I would also emphasize, for instance, bad postmodern thinking, which basically is one of the intellectual strongholds of attitude of anything goes. Conspiracy theories, then those are good 3 examples of creating a soil of unreality. The 5th basic tenet is the ideology or science of believing in natural societal hierarchy. There is a natural order of things in which certain groups have natural or innate birthrights, granting them power and dominance, while other groups are seen as subservient groups of people. And this distinction, the hierarchical distinction, is usually very closely knit together with ideas of race and sex. The 6th trait is victimhood, and this relates actually to the one before, because in the past the natural dominant group was in power, which of course made it a better time, that past time. And presently this natural order has been disrupted by forces in the present day world, which are degenerates, liberals, whatever the term. And these people have toppled the power balance in that way that the ruling group of people have been denied of their rightful dominant role. And this, of course, has to be rectified. And here we are basically describing the story of victimhood. The seventh trait is a double standard interpretation of law and order. Those who have their birthright for dominance are expected to have different sets of expectations in regards to being law-abiding citizen than subservient groups of people. The top of the hierarchy, they to a certain degree are seen to be above the law, because to a certain degree the top tier is seen as superhumans, endowed with blessings from the law, God, whatever, supreme being. And this gives them the birthright to be above the law. And this is contrasted by the subservient groups, which are supposed to be under the thumb or dominated by the iron fist of the law and order, and are always expected to be meek and servile. The eighth one is anxiety that relates to sex and reproductive life of the nation. There is deep concern and anxiety or fear that the vulnerable part of the population, women and children, are tainted by the degenerates and liberals. The ninth trait is what Stanley calls Sodoma and Gomorrah. It creates the image that country living is wholesome and healthy, some sort of idealized pastoral in which the real countrymen live. This in opposition to urban living, which traditionally has attracted more creatives. The 10th trait is a very disturbing trait with regards to its name. It's called Arbeit macht frei. And I don't know if all of you are familiar where this sentence comes from. It is on the top of the gate of Auschwitz. So it's been put there as a sign for people who enter Auschwitz as Auschwitz's victims. This basic belief in fascism relates to the idea that these degenerates and liberals are naturally lazy, naturally averse to values of hard-working, ordinary people. So, for Stanley, these 10 traits describe fascism. Why did I take so much trouble of going through them? I personally completely agree with forensic psychiatric Bandy. I think she has somehow been involved with Yale University. I don't know exactly her title, but I totally agree with her when she basically has argued that fascism is not that much of a political movement, but rather a mental pathology which has been moved to the scene or arena of political life. Now, what does that mean? How does this translate to what I try to accomplish here. So basically what we have here is that there seems to be a connection, correlation, some kind of relationship between certain types of personality disorders. I think she's referring to, when she was talking about this, she's mainly referring to the personality disorder of narcissistic personality disorder. Let's not go too deeply into this one because I'm not an expert on the field, but basically what we have is that there is a certain cluster of personality disorders in which narcissistic personality disorder is included. So when we talk about those personality disorders, that when people who possess those characteristics of these personality disorders, when they move to the arena of political life, the end result is fascism. Okay? So there is this narcissistic personality disorder and other personality disorders that are related to the same cluster as that one. And when these ones are translated to political life, the end result is fascism. That's basically what she's saying. Now, before we go any further, we have to make a distinction here. What we have, on the other hand, is personality. I have a personality, you have a personality, extrovert, introvert, so on and so on. And then we have different kinds of language games or arenas of lives in which people can enter. And let's say that you have a narcissistic personality or disorder. You can be a chef, you can end up working in a restaurant and you have that personality disorder. Or you could be an actor, you end up in theatre or in Hollywood, whatever. But you can also enter the arena, the language game of politics. And when that is done, that is translated. It comes as a reality in that language game, the reality of fascism. So she's basically talking about personalities, but then she's also talking about a certain language game which relates to politics. Okay? So, and there seems to be some sort of correlation or tie between these two things. What then is the key concept that somehow ties these two worlds together, the world of personality and the world of language games, or the language game of arena of politics? I would go for the very fundamental concept that experts refer to when they talk about narcissistic personality disorders. And this fundamental concept is that narcissistic personality disorder patients display the lack of whole object relationships. Now, what does that mean? Narcissists display lack of whole object relationships. What does it mean? When you deal as an expert or as any person with a narcissistic personality disorder person, you're immediately struck by this very unstable fluctuation of seeing other persons from the point of view of love and hatred, and or friend and enemy. And sometimes a person's status can change from loved one to hated one in a wink of an eye, in a blink of an eye, just like that, in an instant. And there seems, for these types of personality disorders, there seems to be very little consideration of how we all should see other people as complexes of good and bad traits, and that there is lots of grey area in that, in the traits of that personality. The same thing seems to apply to fascism and to the fascist pseudoscience. When you look at especially the history of fascism evolving, for instance, in the Third Reich, there seems to be something really eerily teenagey or infantile in their object relationships, in how they characterize the other. And when I use the word teenagey or infantile, I'm literally referring to the same things that people are familiar with when they deal with teenagers. Because when there is this puberty happening in teenagers' lives, it can be a very tumultuous period. So they can shout at you that I hate you, and next moment they're the lovely kids that you used to know all those years. So that's what I refer to when I refer to teenaging. And if that describes fascism, there is this very black and white understanding of good guys and bad guys. And that's why it's teenaging. But there is also something else. We should understand this whole idea of very unstable love and hate relationships in terms of time, in terms of how fascism evolved in the Third Reich over the course of years. So when you look at the history of fascism in Germany during that time, there was this volcanic quality about how everything evolved. Let's say that a person few weeks ago who was considered to be a real patriotic, within weeks or within days, maybe some conspiracy theory shows up or some rumor shows up, and that same person is seen in a different light. This person is a traitor, this person is a person non grata, whatever. This person should be put to concentration camps, blah, 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 blah. And it's also, if you look at, for instance, when Hitler went to war and how he had allies and enemies, and how the position of an ally changed into an enemy into an ally, there is this very tumultuous, it's almost as if this sort of like black and white, I hate you, I love relationship. It's almost like it's volcanic in that sense, that there is a layer of lava comes which solidifies certain situation and it's there for a while, and then another layer comes on top of that one and it solidifies into something completely different. So there is this sort of like volcanic constant moving of this, who is enemy and who is ally, who is our darling and who is not our darling. That describes the historical procession of fascism moving in time. So, and that already is suspiciously teenagey. It's almost like describing someone's years of puberty. Well, after all that I've been talking here, this is the point, the core point of it all. There is a connection or similarity between people who have diagnosed personality disorders, especially narcissistic personality disorder, and the pseudoscience of fascism. And like narcissists, it seems that in this political movement there is a huge difficulty of seeing whole object relationships, many sides on groups of people, situations and things. Things are very black and white. Now, let me just put this one out there. First of all, none of us are completely free of narcissistic traits, but usually one of the traits we pick up quite quickly when we see a balanced grown-up adult is the ability to see multiple sides on things, on people, and to be able also to see redeeming qualities. And this is clearly lacking in narcissistic personality disorders and in the pseudoscience of fascism. A useful example in this respect is what Stanley says about fascist propaganda. Because for him what makes fascist propaganda specific is that not only it describes the other in dehumanizing terms, they are vermin, they are criminals, they are lazy, they are degenerate, they are sexual deviants, liberals, out of touch elites, lower race, you name it. But the fact that there is this sort of like a teenagey fervor, passion, vitriol in this propaganda, and this is the teenagey, the vitriol, the passion, the anger, this is the teenagey factor. But to put this all together, for me the integral of Jason Stanley's descriptions of traits of fascism is this teenagey black and white ally and enemy understanding of the other. And also the fact that there is volatility in the process of this emotional turmoil of changing positions. How these crude descriptives are used over time. And let me make this one also clear. There is a correlation between a cluster of certain types of personality disorders and the cadre of leaders of this political movement. I would say that it's very, very likely that these people display either openly, directly, full-on narcissistic personality disorders, or they show some of those traits. Machiavellism, dark triad, you can find more about that one, or emotional rigidity, different kinds of traits that usually are closely connected to this basic personality disorder. So there is a great chance that these leaders display these kinds of traits. But let's stop here, and we continue this task of trying to make sense of the essence of fascism in the next part of this 5th episode. Once again, if you have liked this video, think that this is interesting, and you want to support me, you can always press that subscribe button, and if that seems too much for you for now, please at least press the button like. Both help me on my task of making these videos. I see you in the next part of this episode of this video essay. Have a nice day.